afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had lunch and was already able to rest a little bit. I hope we can get your attention with this conversation. We're very excited to be here today to be speaking about art meets AI and new business models for the creative economy. Probably most of the talks you might be attending around those topics have been mostly focused on the creation part. Generative images, the challenges of authorship, copyright, et cetera, et cetera. But today we really want to look into a different perspective, a different opportunity, and that is how AI as a business infrastructure for the art and collectibles market can work. And here we're going to be speaking not only about arts, but also watches, handbags, rare objects that are increasingly treated as assets and need to be researched, evaluated, financed, insured, inherited, and transacted. And that remains a market highly fragmented, opaque, and we could even say expensive to navigate, especially, and we're going to be speaking about this, below the very top end. So today we're going to be speaking precisely about how AI can make this market much more efficient, transparent, accessible, and financially legible. And to tap into this opportunity, we're going to be joined by Sam Gladman, who is actually the co-founder and CEO of a platform that is called RSignal. Sam, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm going to start this conversation by speaking about, as I mentioned, when we think about AI and the creative sector, we immediately think about the creation point. But your work with your platform, what you've been precisely tapping into, is about how AI can become infrastructure for the art and the collectible market. And I would love you to define a bit better how that opportunity looks like.
Sure. So when you're dealing with art particularly, you're often dealing with unique objects. So there is essentially no direct kind of precedent for what something's worth. Collectibles, you're often dealing with kind of rare assets, and so the sort of same thing applies. And up until now, it simply wasn't possible to make sense of these objects unless you had sort of teams of specialists doing kind of huge amounts of research and then kind of debating what something is worth, what the kind of cultural impact is, how you position it, using sort of specialist AI to kind of make sense of different types of data and large data sets. You can now analyze huge volumes of unique objects at scale, which completely transforms the kind of sellability of particularly sort of mid-market objects, which is really where we believe there's kind of huge amounts of sort of unmet demand.
I think probably you are becoming every time more familiar because I think something that technology has brought to the table is that we're capable of browsing on the internet and finding these kind of objects like our watches, handbags, design objects, etc. That traditionally were treated as objects of passion, I would even say in certain cases cultural assets, but now they're definitely being treated increasingly as financial assets. So how does AI and what you're trying to do with the platform, what does it change when we look at them through the financial asset lens?
Yes, so we're very excited about the idea of not so much objects being treated purely as financial assets, because in the art world that can lead to bubbles, but the idea that art can be passion plus a financial asset, and that's a really, really healthy way for the market to grow. And so that's something that we're very excited about and very focused on. Obviously, when you are dealing with art as a financial asset, as one of the kind of motivations, you have to then start thinking about cultural momentum. Is the artist kind of moving in the right direction? Do they have kind of staying power? Is there the kind of institutional support behind them? And so we can obviously use AI to track momentum signals, not just price signals, but more sort of unstructured kind of fuzzy signals that kind of impact long-term demand. But also there's things like condition, provenance, authenticity, all those kind of things that become incredibly important when you're treating art as a financial asset. and have a huge impact on the sort of financial value or kind of lack thereof.
So building on what you just mentioned, I think most of us can perceive from the outside that the R market is a market that, as it looks like today, is highly, there's a market inefficiency. So when we think about the R market and collectibles as markets, where do you think most of the inefficiency lays today? Is it information? Is it valuation? Is liquidity, trust, regulation, transaction costs? What are you trying to tap into, or where do you see most opportunity?
So I think sort of distorted information feeds through to everything else, and then causes issues with valuations. How do you understand what something's worth if you don't have the full picture? Then how do you value something for insurance if you don't know what it's worth? So I think that kind of accurate, unbiased information is a challenge. There's a lot of information in the art world, but how do you make sense of it? How do you kind of triangulate it so that you're not just relying on auction price history, but also combining kind of cultural context information? So I think it's this combination of different types of data that can really sort of help you overcome the inefficiency.
I think we mentioned it at the beginning of our conversation, but from the, let's say, the very top end of the market, there is more information out there. But, and mostly that happens that expensive works have specialists, advisors, lenders, appropriate due diligence. However, what happens below that threshold?
Yeah, and this is really the sort of thing that motivates us. I mean, when we're putting together our pitch decks, we're always talking about the sub $50,000 kind of objects, and that makes up 95% of the volumes moving through the art market, and I think probably 99% of other categories. Arts generally sits above. For something, I mean, really in the art world, in the sort of major auction houses, they're only really spending significant time on objects above sort of $500,000 that can sort of, their commissions can justify the costs of specialists kind of doing the research, doing all the sort of really trying to understand an object in a lot of detail. So if you go onto an auction house website, onto a day sale, there's often very little beyond kind of basic cataloging information around the object. I wouldn't say that auction houses necessarily don't know what they're doing in pricing. I think they do, but they're not necessarily able to spend the time to really think through the sort of implications or the kind of market movement of these objects at lower levels. So AI completely changes that, because you can analyze thousands of objects at scale. You can always identify the most relevant market comparables. You can sort of build your kind of cultural momentum signals. This is what something similar sold for last year, but actually we know that things are beginning to change, and so we have to sort of price something differently. So essentially AI just completely opens up that market, and we would say that the art market is kind of suppressed because the economics don't scale at those lower levels. That really suppresses the art market. And by using AI, essentially, you're kind of opening the art market, because there's enormous latent demand at these sort of lower levels. I think it was 2 years ago, but there was a stat that 83% of wealthy young Americans want to collect art, but actually very small percentages actually are converting into buying art, because new collectors start below $50,000, but there's no information at that level, and you also can't afford to pay an art advisor. And an art advisor, in the traditional sense, isn't interested in you either, because their commission is too low. So AI completely changes the game here, kind of opening up the market at those levels.
Yeah, I understand that this AI intelligence layer is what can bring the market as something more dynamic.
Yeah, totally, because all of a sudden anyone can make sense of any work of art or collectible item. There's always things that human experts know that sort of AI doesn't have access to in data sets. We always think about AI in this space being machine plus human in the loop. However, for an emerging collector at lower price points, you can get 95% of the information that you would ever need through an AI system. So it just completely changes the game for such collectors.
I would like to bridge what you're saying too. I mean, it's been identified that there is a great wealth transfer, and that is on the way, and that includes arts and collectibles. So what problems, or what, let's frame it as challenges and opportunities, does this create for heirs, for families, for advisors, and for institutions, and how in that, big, great wealth transfer, there are actually plenty of new business opportunities, maybe as the one you're tapping into with your platform?
Sure. So obviously the great wealth transfer is an enormous opportunity kind of in the space that we're in, because really what you find in the art market is that supply is a huge constraint as demand is. And so auction houses are always thinking, how do we get access to the best property? Actually, if you find the desirable property, the buyers are not necessarily the issue. So the great wealth transfer, you're already seeing these incredible collections coming to market at a sort of greater frequency than you were seeing 2 or 3 years ago. And that's actually really helped the art market sort of start to emerge from this real kind of downturn from 2024. So I think supply of great stuff is an enormous opportunity. For the families, those people that are potentially inheriting these great collections, fantastic. But it's not easy, because you might inherit art that's worth sort of X million dollars on the surface, but actually then you have to try and sell it. And often the most sort of liquid, the ways to sell something quickly are not going to get you the best price. Auction houses can get you the best price, but it really depends. I mean, traditionally auction houses were kind of wholesalers, and if you wanted to get a top price, you would sell privately and you would sort of wait until there was a relevant buyer. So it's quite, you can't just sell your collection in a month or even a year. If it's hugely desirable, then the auction house might do a sort of single owner sale, and you might be able to, and you might get top prices. But for the vast majority of people that are inheriting art, that's not going to be the case. The issues kind of go sort of on. Then you've got the sort of regulated space, and the sort of anti-money laundering in the EU is becoming a huge space. Art and luxury assets are obviously a key target, because it traditionally has been a way to avoid paying taxes. The equivalent is the IRS in the US, and so actually navigating regulation, I think, is also a key area of sort of risk. Again, where we see a huge opportunity is kind of helping people navigate those risks. I was reading a stat that something like 43% of valuations that the IRS reviews in the art space are seen to be wrong. And I think the IRS can then fine you a huge percentage of the value of the collection if you submit a wrong valuation. So great opportunities, but also kind of there are sort of risks around there as well.
And now that everything seems to be swallowed by the big platforms and ChatGPT or Claude, or how can you really tap? Where is the business opportunity that is not addressed by a big LLM?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're asked this question pretty much every day. I think there's sort of three primary areas. The first area is in the art market. There's not such an issue with incorrect data, but there's a huge issue with biased data, because the vast majority of data is on gallery websites. It's people trying to sell you works of art. So the underlying models don't have the sort of specialist knowledge to be able to kind of reduce biases. And we do huge amounts of bias reduction by essentially looking for a large group of similar market objects and then normalizing biases across them. The other area is access to data. Obviously, large language models have access to huge unstructured data sets. They are able to go in and find certain prices out of structured data sets from kind of auction websites, for example, but they don't have a sort of pre-structured data set of sort of millions of objects. And so in our business, we've built a data set of 10 million objects. It's growing at probably 2 or 3 million a month at the moment, and giving a machine access to that, plus the unstructured data is immensely valuable in terms of kind of quality of results, accuracy, and reducing bias. The third piece is around, I suppose, consistency and human workflows. The art world is not going to replace humans with AI anytime soon, and also in many ways we can't because there are too many sort of subjective elements. So we've also built the platform in a way that really enables humans to come in and adjust key assumptions at any point, and that enables us to get to results that are incredibly accurate. So the existing art world, humans do the whole process, they come to an end number. What we do is we do the whole process, give a suggested end number, and then they come and essentially check and adjust the assumptions. So much more efficient versus a kind of a ChatGPT or Claude, which can often give you good results, but is completely inconsistent every time, and therefore isn't really usable beyond kind of content generation or sort of business planning.
You mentioned something I'm sure the audience is interested in, and it's the idea of valuation and prices. And actually, valuation is probably one of the most sensitive areas in the art market. How do you foresee how far can AI go in terms of price prediction, and where do you foresee like limits there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one of the things that we've been saying is that we don't do AI evaluations. We provide all the assumptions to enable experts to then go and do valuations that are more accurate very quickly. That's not entirely true because we are doing a lot of R&D around price prediction at this point. So that might change, but I don't see us getting to the stage where we would want to remove the human from the valuation process, because there are too many factors that can't really be quantified. Firstly, there are many different types of valuations. So an auction estimate would be one valuation, and that's very different from a kind of replacement value if you actually kind of lost the asset, which often in the art world is double what it might sell for in auction or auction tomorrow. So you've got all those different types of estimate, but also going back to the financial asset and object of desire point, objects of desire, there's a certain element of unpredictability because they're desirable. You can't really remove the emotion from the auction house floor, which can lead things to kind of perform very differently to what a machine might expect them to. I think a really good example was a Giacometti at Sotheby's. I think it was Sotheby's last year, and it was the minimum the auction house reserve was $70 million, and it got to 63 million, and then no one wanted it. My take was that yes, it's an incredibly important rare bust of Giacometti's brother, but actually, is it the most beautiful Giacometti I've seen? Like it really isn't. And if I was spending 70 million on a Giacometti, if I was able to, it's certainly not the one that I would have gone for. And those kind of factors are really important. And we do a huge amount of work with museum curators to try to make our system more convenient for them to then kind of add those judgments on top. So yes, AI can completely transform the valuations process, but actually coming to an accurate final number, maybe, but I don't think that's necessarily the goal. The goal is building auditable assumptions that can be adjusted when things change. I'll just give one more very quick example. We're doing some work with a very large appraiser, and they're trying to make sense of 1,400 objects, all art and collectibles, but none of them are by named artists. So what we do is we essentially identify comparable objects for every single work, which then enables their valuers to come to a final number. And that seems to me to be the optimal use of AI in sort of supporting valuations.
You actually brought a very poetic element to the whole conversation, is whether AI is able to identify beauty or not, which of course we won't open that conversation here because it would stay here for an entire week. But building a bit more on the idea of price valuation, and I think we can all agree that AI can make art and collectibles in a way more financially, at least more financially legible. Whether we can really delegate 100% that task to AI, that's a different question, but definitely it brings a layer of intelligence. The idea of bringing this additional layer of intelligence, do you think, does it unlock also across lending, insurance, state planning, collateralizations? What do you think, what are your takes on that?
Totally, because right now you kind of have the liquid art market, which is generally high-value objects that you can get loans against. And I mean, I think the art lending market is growing incredibly fast. It's about 40 billion this year, I think, up to 50 billion maybe next year. But they're only lending against Picassos that you know would sell for a lot of money tomorrow. The only time the big lenders would lend against objects at lower value is if they're essentially backed up by very valuable objects that they know would ultimately cover the cost. There are mid-market lenders in the arts and collectible space kind of popping up, but again, they're only going to lend against a Banksy or a Warhol print because they know that even though the value is much, much lower, they could still sell it tomorrow. Once you can start to look at all the different factors that determine value beyond just secondary market prices, that completely opens up the market to kind of lend more widely. Insurance as well. Again, if you can understand value beyond just price, sort of secondary market price data, again, you can insure much more efficiently. You can track what's happening over time. If something changes around an object, you can you know about it, and you can kind of adjust assumptions accordingly.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to wrap this conversation with a last question. And as we're here in South Summit, surrounded by entrepreneurs, what does the art market teach us about building AI companies in traditional high-trust industries?
I think the art market's probably one of the industries where trust is most important, and that is most resistant to kind of technological change or innovation. I think that human relationships is absolutely fundamental to everything in the art market. So coming in saying, we've built this great AI tool that can replace everything that you're doing, and there's no human involvement, just falls flat. So really thinking about it as a tool that then that sort of enhances relationships, and that kind of keeps the human sort of front and center, I think, is absolutely essential, because I just don't believe for a minute that kind of humans are going to not have a key role to play in this market.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sam. Well, I hope by this conversation we open up the idea that there are entrepreneurial opportunities beyond creation and beyond the possibilities that AI brings us in the creative space, that examples like the art market are probably like a promising field. Any industry that has a market that is more perceived as subjective, with the new parameters and opportunities that AI can bring to the table, definitely this layer of intelligence can bring additional opportunities. So thank you all so much for listening to this.
Thank you.